Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. Newman's world is still but irrevocably shifting as multiple fault lines crack open across Genoa City, and while chaos beverages on several fronts, each move made by Nick, Sharon, and Victor carries consequences that will echo far beyond a single deal or fractured relationship, beginning with Nick's determination to forge his own Matt Clark plan. One that reflects not only his growing independence from Victor's shadow but also his adding urgency to cover his family and reclaim control. At a moment when everything feels dangerously close to slipping down, because as Nick lies in that sanitarium bed, the sterile walls and metrical beeping of machines only edge his resoluteness rather than weaken it, and the news filtering in about Victor's failed accommodations with Kane Ashby and Phyllis Summers becomes the final catalyst that pushes him into action, persuading him that staying around while others play power games is no longer an option. Nick has spent too long replying to heads rather of shaping them, and this Matt situation feels particular in a way that cuts straight to the bone, especially with Jack Abbott involved, because Jack represents both an handicap and an implicit supporter, a man Nick knows well enough to understand that deals with him bear honesty, influence, and impeccable timing, three effects Victor has formerly squandered through stubborn pride and endless feuding. Meanwhile, across city, Victor Newman is reeling from a reversal he no way anticipated, not because he lacks experience or cunning, but because this time his usual intimidation tactics simply aren't working, and when Kane and Phyllis refuse to strike a deal, it's further than a business failure, it's a direct assault on Victor's sense of dominance, his belief that every boardroom, every concession, and every adversary will ultimately bend to his will, yet Phyllis takes unmistakable pleasure in rubbing swab into the crack, riding Victor with trim confidence as she plays up their Newman Enterprises preemption plot, savoring every moment she gets to watch him lose ground, reminding him that he undervalued her and Kane, that he assumed control was his birthright rather than commodity that must be constantly defended, and though Victor fires back with pledges of vengeance and dark promises about turning the tables, indeed his pitfalls feel concave in the moment. Because for the first time in a long while, he's talking further about what he'll do than what he can do right now. That sense of incompetence follows Victor home, where he reconvenes with Nikki Newman, only to find that his woman, typically his most pious protector, is no longer willing to blindly accept his solace, and what begins as a tense discussion snappily escalates into a heated argument fueled by months of undetermined resentment, because Nikki is furious that Victor's stubborn feud with Jack Abbott has formally again placed Newman Enterprises in jeopardy. And she does hash words when she tells him that if he had come hung up with scoring the AI program to use as armament against Jack, they might no way have been vulnerable to this extremity in the first place. Nikki's disappointment cuts deeper than any adversary's attack, and Victor feels it, indeed, as he tries to maintain his commanding presence, averring that he has everything under control, that lapses are temporary and that he always emerges stronger. But the more he speaks, the further Nikki senses that he's simply telling her what he thinks she wants to hear, offering empty solace rather of concrete results, and that consummation terrifies her, because Nikki knows Victor better than anyone, and when his confidence feels forced rather than spontaneous, it signals real peril ahead for their conglomerate. While Victor and Nikki clash behind unrestricted doors, another emotional storm is unfolding away as Sharon Newman reconnects with Tessa Porter, and what begins as a simple catch-over snappily turns into a ruinous disclosure about how far Mariah Copeland has drifted down from the life she formerly fought so hard to make, because Tessa reveals that Mariah checked out of the clinic in Boston and has flatly refused to return home, cutting off meaningful communication and pushing everyone, especially Tessa, at arm's length, and as Tessa speaks, the pain in her voice is insolvable to ignore, the prostration of loving someone who no longer seems willing to be saved etched into every word. Sharon listens hardly, her motherly instincts remonstrating in as she tries to understand what drove Mariah to insulate herself so fully, but the most shocking moment comes when Tessa admits she's formally begun the divorce process, a decision that feels both heartbreaking and ineluctable, because Sharon incontinently worries that Tessa may be acting too hastily, that grief and fear might be clouding her judgment, prompting tolerance and compassion in the face of Mariah's struggles, yet Tessa counters with quiet resoluteness, explaining that this is an unforeseen breakdown but the capstone of months of distance, silence, and emotional abandonment, and she simply can't endure any further pain or false stopgap, not when Mariah keeps shutting her out and refusing help, and though Sharon offers perspective shaped by her own complicated history with love and loss, she can see that Tessa has reached a breaking point, one where tone preservation outweighs the dream of conciliation, making this implicit divorce not an act of atrocity, but one of survival. As Sharon processes the possible end of her son's marriage, Nick is making moves of his own, preparing to take charge of the Matt Clark fire with a resoluteness that surprises indeed himself, because rather than remaining in the sanitarium under observation, Nick is ready to subscribe himself out, driven by the belief that being sidelined is no longer an option when the stakes are this high. And formerly he learns that Jack's attempt to reach a deal with Victor has failed. Nick season opening that no bone differently has considered approaching Jack directly, without Victor's baggage, without old grievances muddying the waters, and without the arrogance that has formerly torpedoed former accommodations, because Nick understands that Jack felicitation's strength tempered by sincerity, and if there's a chance to strike a Matt deal that protects the people who count most, Nick is willing to sink himself enough to make a plea rather than a trouble, indeed if it means stepping into an uncomfortable home where commitment blur and long-standing battles must be shortly set away. This decision marks a turning point for Nick, motioning his amenability to operate singly of Victor's iron grip and forge his own path through Genoa City's unfaithful power dynamics, and as he prepares to defy Jack, the weight of everything additional, the worsening state of Newman Enterprises, Sharon's heartbreaking discovery about Mariah and Tessa, Victor's raising conflict with Nikki hangs heavy in the air, because each plot is subtly intertwined, feeding into a larger narrative about control, love, and the cost of refusing to change, and while Victor clings to old strategies and old grievances, Nick represents a new approach, one embedded in rigidity and empathy, indeed as he brands himself for whatever fallout may come from crossing lines that were formerly considered untouchable, making it clear that the coming days in Genoa City will test every character's limits, force painful choices, and review alliances in ways no bone saw coming, because when deals collapse, marriages fracture, and power slips through formerly confident fritters, the only certainty left wing is that nothing, and no bone, will crop unchanged. Nick's Matt plan, Sharon's discovery, Victor's reversal. Nick Newman will form his own Matt Clark plan while Sharon Newman makes a tough discovery. Victor Newman will also face a reversal when it comes to negotiating, so then's what YNR suckers can anticipate. For starters, Victor wouldn't be suitable to strike a deal with Kane Ashby and Phyllis Summers. Phyllis will tease Victor now that he's lost and play up their Newman preemption plot, but he may promise to turn the tables and get vengeance. Latterly, Victor will reconvene with Nikki Newman and get into a heated argument with her. Nikki will be upset since Victor let his intransigence over his feud with Jack Abbott put them in this position. Still, they could have averted this massive extremity at Newman Enterprises, if Victor hadn't scored the AI program to use against Jack. Likewise, Nikki wouldn't suppose Victor truly has a grip on the situation. The further Victor tries to calm Nikki down by offering solace, the further she'll feel like he's just telling her what she wants to hear. While Victor and Nikki bicker, Sharon Newman will catch up with Tessa Porter and discover that her relationship with Mariah Copeland has deteriorated indeed further. Tessa will offer updates on Mariah checking out of the clinic in Boston and refusing to return home. Since Mariah has cut off any real communication and keeps pushing Tessa down, Tessa will admit she's formally begun the divorce process. Sharon might worry Tessa is being too hasty about the end of her marriage, but Tessa may fight that this has been going on for months. Tessa just can't take it presently, so she may stand her ground on ending effects with Mariah before she can beget any fresh pain. While Sharon listens and offers her perspective to Tessa, Nick will take charge of another situation across city. It sounds like Nick's about to subscribe himself out of the sanitarium and take control when it comes to this whole Matt fire. Once Nick gets the rearmost news about Jack's failed deal with Victor, he'll decide to approach Jack himself. Nick will be ready to deliver a plea and hopefully strike a Matt deal of his own soon enough. As the ripple goods of Nick's bold decision continue to spread, Genoa City finds itself perched on the edge of metamorphosis, where every discussion feels charged with consequence and every silence hides an implied trouble, because Nick's choice to step out of the sanitarium and into the fray isn't simply about Matt Clark, it's about reclaiming agency in a family where control has always flowed over from Victor like an unbreakable law, And as Nick prepares to defy Jack Abbott, his studies churn with clashing feelings: fidelity to his father battling with frustration over Victor's repeated mistakes, compassion for Sharon colliding with wrathfulness over how deeply Mariah's situation has entwined, and an underpinning fear that no matter how precisely he plays this, someone he loves will pay the price. When Nick eventually comes face to face with Jack, the pressure between them is unmistakable, shaped by times of contest, collective respect, and participated scars from battles fought on both business and particular fronts, and yet this meeting feels different from any ahead, because Nick doesn't arrive with demands or pitfalls. He arrives with honesty, admitting that Victor's approach has failed and that the collateral damage has grown too severe to ignore, and that modesty, rare among Newmans, incontinently shifts the dynamic, catching Jack off guard and forcing him to review his hypotheticals about Nick's part in the ongoing chaos girding Matt Clark. Jack listens as Nick lays out his case, not just framing Matt as a log-rolling chip but as a mortal being whose fate has come entangled in the ruthless chess game between elephants, and Nick's plea resonates precisely because it strips down the usual bravado and replaces it with commodity far more compelling: responsibility. The idea that someone must eventually put an end to the cycle of retribution before it destroys everything in its path, and though Jack remains conservative, keenly apprehensive that any deal with a Newman carries retired pitfalls, he can't ignore the sincerity in Nick's voice, nor the strategic wisdom in bypassing Victor altogether, leaving the door cracked open for a possible agreement that could upend the balance of power across the megacity. Back at the Newman estate, Victor senses that commodity is shifting beyond his control, and suspicion stoned by decades of warfare that tells him the real peril isn't Cain, Phyllis, or Jack but Nick, because Victor has always believed he knows his son outside and out, yet this new interpretation of Nick, one willing to maneuver singly and appeal directly to adversaries, unsettles him in a way he refuses to admit audibly, indeed as Nikki presses him harder than ever to face reality, reminding him that his preoccupation with vengeance has brought them a better's stability, and maybe indeed the fidelity of their own children. And when Victor dismisses her enterprises as overreaction, Nikki eventually pushes back with brutal clarity, telling him that consolation without results is pointless, that leadership without rigidity is despotism, and that if he continues down this path, he may win battles but lose his family, words that strike Victor like a physical blow and leave him shortly speechless, because Nikki isn't just censuring his strategy, she's questioning his heritage, and for a man who has erected his identity on dominance and control, that's the deepest crack of all. Away, Sharon struggles to attune the strength Tessa displays with the heartache beneath it, replaying their discussion in her mind as she grapples with the painful verity that Mariah's insulation isn't just a phase, it's a deliberate pullout born of fear, shame, and undetermined trauma, and Sharon's motherly instincts scream at her to intermediate, to chase after Mariah and pull her back into the safety of family and love, yet experience has tutored her that occasionally pushing too hard only drives people further down, leaving her torn between action and restraint, especially now that divorce looms as a veritably real possibility, a legal line that formerly crossed may be insolvable to abolish, and Sharon can't help but feel the weight of guilt pressing down on her, wondering if she missed signs, if she could have done more before effects reached this breaking point. Indeed, as she brands herself to support Tessa through what promises to be one of the most painful chapters of her life. Tessa, for her part, returns home carrying a quiet resoluteness that masks profound grief, because beginning the divorce process feels like admitting defeat, yet staying trapped in a marriage defined by absence feels like erasing herself, and as she sorts through paperwork and recollections likewise, she wrestles with the haunting question of whether walking down is an act of tone respect or rendition, ignorant that Mariah, nearly out there, is fighting her own demons in silence. Induced that pushing Tessa down is the only way to cover her from farther pain, creating a woeful standoff where love exists on both sides but fear has erected walls too high to climb. Meanwhile, Cain Ashby and Phyllis Summers savor their perceived palm over Victor, mistaking his temporary reversal for endless defeat, and Phyllis, ever the demagogue, can't repel boasting about how completely they've overreached him, confident that Newman Enterprises is eventually within reach, yet Cain remains more conservative, seeing that Victor's quiet moments are frequently the most dangerous, that the man doesn't deteriorate when cornered, he recalibrates, and as Cain watches Phyllis celebrate precociously, a flicker of mistrustfulness crosses his mind, because he knows that power seized without foresight frequently invites disaster, and with Nick now moving singly and Jack redefining his position, the board is far from settled, setting the stage for unanticipated reversals that could leave Moments winners scrabbling to survive hereafter's fallout. As night falls over Genoa City, the vestments of these integrated stories strain, drawing each character closer to a moment of reckoning, because Nick's adventure with Jack has the implicit to review alliances and expose cracks within the Newman dynasty. Victor's worsening confidence threatens to enkindle deeper fractures in his marriage and conglomerate. Sharon's discovery forces her to defy the limits of love and control as a mama, and Tessa's heartbreaking decision signals an end that may also be the mourning of commodity sorrowfully necessary, and through it all, Matt Clark remains the catalyst, the name spoken in hushed tones, the life hanging in the balance as important numbers debate strategy and morality in equal measure, reminding everyone involved that behind every plan and power play lies a mortal cost that cannot be negotiated down. And as dawn approaches, bringing with it the pledge of answers and the trouble of unrecoverable consequences, Genoa City holds its breath, because the choice is made now, by Nick seeking concession, by Victor adhering to old wars, by Sharon offering compassion without control, and by Tessa choosing herself over suffering, will shape not only the immediate extremity but the emotional and moral geography of the megacity for times to come, proving formally again that in a world erected on secrets, ambition, and fragile commitment, the most dangerous move of all is refusing to change when change is the only path forward. As the sun rises advanced over Genoa City, the calm that settles in the early morning hours is deceptive, masking the emotional and strategic foreshock still resonating through every corner of city, because the choices made in the murk of night infrequently stay retired once daylight arrives, and Nick Newman feels that verity acutely as he leaves his meeting with Jack Abbott carrying no guarantees, only the fragile stopgap that honesty may succeed where intimidation failed, a stopgap that both empowers and terrifies him, since stepping into this part means completely accepting responsibility for whatever outgrowth follows, and as he renewals the discussion in his mind, Nick recognizes that he has crossed an unnoticeable line, one that separates being Victor Newman's son from being his own man, because indeed if a Matt Clark deal materializes, Victor will no way forgive the audacity of being bypassed, and yet Nick can't bring himself to lament it, not when so numerous lives are formerly hanging in the balance due to unbounded pride and endless vendettas. Back at the estate, Victor senses the shift before anyone dares speak it audibly, the house feeling colder, quieter, as though the walls themselves are hearkening, and when word reaches him that Nick inked himself out of the sanitarium and took matters into his own hands, the fury that erupts is nippy and stormy, but beneath it lies commodity far more unsettling, fear, because Victor understands power, and he knows that the most dangerous challenge doesn't come from open adversaries, but from successors who no longer ask authorization, and as he paces the room, replaying decades of hard-fought palms and brutal offerings, Victor is forced to defy the uncomfortable possibility that the conglomerate he erected may no longer bend entirely to his will, that the coming chapter of Newman Enterprises could be written by hands other than his own, a consummation that clashes violently with his belief that control is synonymous with survival. Nikki watches this internal battle play out with growing concern, torn between empathy for the man she loves and frustration from the wars he refuses to end, and for the first time in times, she seriously considers what life might look like if Victor truly lost his grip not just on the company, but on the family dynamic that has long revolved around his authority, and though the study frightens her, it also brings a strange sense of relief, because perhaps only by losing commodity precious will Victor eventually learn that strength isn't measured solely by domination, but by the amenability to hear, to acclimatize, and to trust, indeed when doing so feels like rendition. Across city, Sharon begins the delicate task of reaching out to Mariah, choosing her words with meticulous care as she leaves dispatches that balance concern with respect for boundaries, determined not to repeat once miscalculations where love came control, and every unanswered call feels like a small heartache, yet Sharon persists, adhering to the belief that presence, harmonious, non-judgmental presence, may ultimately pierce the insulation Mariah has erected around herself. Indeed, as Sharon prepares for the painful possibility that her son may need to walk this path alone for a while longer, and in those quiet moments, Sharon reflects on her own history of running down from pain, fading echoes of herself in Mariah's retreat, a consummation that deepens her compassion but also sharpens her fear. Meanwhile, Tessa moves forward with the divorce process, meeting with attorneys and subscribing papers that make everything achingly real, each hand feeling like a farewell to the future she formerly imagined, and though musketeers prompt her to take comfort in the clarity of her decision, Tessa grapples with swells of mistrustfulness, wondering if she's abandoning Mariah at her smallest point, yet every time she considers stopping, she remembers the endless nights spent staying for dispatches that no way came, the emotional prostration of loving someone who refuses connection, and she reminds herself that choosing her own well-being doesn't negate the love she still holds, it simply acknowledges that love alone cannot fix what fear has broken. Kane Ashby grows decreasingly uneasy as the day unfolds, his instincts advising him that the apparent palm over Victor may be short-lived, and when he learns of Nick's independent accommodations with Jack, the pieces fall into place in a way that makes his stomach drop, because Kane knows that Nick's involvement changes everything, introducing an element of unpredictability that could unravel the precisely constructed plans he and Phyllis have been counting on, and while Phyllis skirmishes off these enterprises with characteristic bravado, Kane can't shake the sense that they've undervalued the youngish Newman, mistaking his empathy for weakness, a misapprehension that could prove disastrous if Nick manages to broker a deal that sidelines them entirely. As these pressures poach, Matt Clark's name continues to surface in rumored exchanges and guarded phone calls, a memorial that behind every strategic initiative lies a person whose fate has been reduced to influence, and Nick, acutely apprehensive of this verity, finds himself visited by the moral weight of his conduct, questioning whether indeed his further compassionate approach truly serves justice or simply offers a kinder facade for the same ruthless game, and this internal conflict drives him to consider terms that prioritize Matt's safety and autonomy, not just the interests of Newman Enterprises, a station that may bring him influence but save his heart, indeed if it means colliding head-on with Victor's worldview. As evening approaches, former